Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining another India Votes 2024 conversation. That's our election edition of Keep Talking. On the agenda today, an issue which should have become a bigger electoral issue, but hasn't. I'm talking about electoral bonds, a political funding mechanism that was declared as illegal and unconstitutional by the Supreme Court in February. Investigation of the public data released on these electoral bonds suggest a very clear trail of quid pro quo, either in terms of bribes or extortion between ruling parties, and definitely the ruling party at the center, which is the BJP, and a whole bunch of corporate donors. What are these electoral bonds? Why is this case so important? And why hasn't it captured the public imagination or the voters' imagination? I'm going to ask these questions to Anjali Bhardwaj. She's an RTI campaigner and activist. She's also on the governing council of Common Cause, which is one of the petitioners in the case against electoral bonds. Anjali, thank you very much for joining us, for making time. I know it's been really hectic. Which city are you in today?
I'm in Delhi, Anuradha. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. Is this a campaign issue as you go from city to city talking about this scam, Anjali?
Anuradha, let me put it this way. When we approached the Supreme Court and, even the Supreme Court's judgment, it's not really about affecting electoral outcomes. It's really about people's right to know, voters' ability to be able to cast an informed vote. What the Supreme Court has said in the electoral bonds case is that the electoral bonds are unconstitutional because they violate Article 19(1)(a) of the Constitution. Article 19(1)(a) of the Constitution of India guarantees every citizen the right to free speech and expression. And the Supreme Court in many judgments has held in the past also that free speech and expression is not possible unless people have information. They should be able to have information to formulate their thoughts, their speech, and therefore their expression. So the electoral bond scheme, which was brought in to completely anonymize all the funding that went through electoral bonds to political parties, completely violated people's right to know and their right to information. And the Supreme Court therefore struck the electoral bond scheme down on the basis that it was violative of Article 19(1)(a). Now, what we are trying to do, and we are visiting different states in the country, is to really say that people must engage with the information. It's not to say how it will influence anybody's vote, etc. But the important thing is that the Supreme Court, the spirit of the Supreme Court judgment was that when people go to vote, they should be able to cast an informed vote. And which is why the Supreme Court not only struck the electoral bond scheme down, it also said that retrospectively, information about who bought electoral bonds and whom did they donate it to, which political party got the electoral bonds, should be put in the public domain before elections. So if you recall, the Supreme Court judgment gave 3 weeks to the SBI to give this information about electoral bonds that were transacted to the ECI, so it could be put in the public domain by the ECI. The government came back, the SBI came back,
saying we will give it to you after June.
Saying we'll give it to you on the 30th of June, which would have been well after the elections. And the Supreme Court took a very strong view and said that that's not acceptable. They passed very stringent directions and in fact even told the SBI that they will consider it willful disobedience of their orders and take contempt proceedings, take them forward if required. And that's how the SBI actually put this information out immediately. So now that this information is out, it's very, very important that people understand the judgment and they engage with the data that has come out, and then they cast their vote. Now, after engaging with the data and after having the information, it's up to people how they
Sure.
cast their vote.
In 2014, before 2014, in fact, almost a couple of years before that, we saw how the India Against Corruption movement, it started as a civil society, public movement, then it got politicized, and then it gathered steam. And over a period of time, it brought corruption front and center as one of the key issues in that election in 2014. I think what I'm trying to ask you, Anjali, is why is the electoral bond issue and the corruption that these electoral bonds and the nature of these electoral bonds created, why has this corruption not become an electoral issue?
So, like you said yourself, Anuradha, that movement, that campaign, India Against Corruption and so on, was in fact 2 to 3 years before the 2014 elections. It takes a long time for something to convert into that kind of a campaign. The Supreme Court judgment has come just a couple of months ago, just a few months before elections. I don't think that, there has been that much time in any case for anyone, if they wanted to take up the issue in that way. But more importantly, there are two other differences which I want to highlight for your audience. Sure. One is that we saw how the mainstream media took up the issue of corruption along with civil society and other people when they protested against corruption. We see there is almost a deafening silence about the electoral bonds issue. We don't see debates happening, discussions happening around this very important issue. And which basically means that forget a campaign, even people's understanding of this very, very critical judgment that has come is not being adequately carried to the masses by the media. Now, mainstream media has a very important role in any democracy. So, of course, social media is important. There is a lot of discussion on social media. There are some honorable exceptions in the mainstream media, but by and large, almost all media is completely silent on this very, very important judgment and issue and the data that what the data reveals. The other thing is that where is the right to protest? We are seeing how very draconian measures are being taken against anyone who dares to hit the streets, sit on a large protest. We are seeing the kind of action that was taken against farmers when recently they tried to approach the capital city. So, during India Against Corruption, we had a government where people could, without any fear of any draconian action, think of collecting in very large numbers in thousands and sitting at Jantar Mantar, at Ram Leela Maidan in Delhi, in different parts of the country, and really raking up the issue and making it mainstream. Now, this complete lack of spaces for protest and dissent, combined with this complete kind of silence in the mainstream media, means that any issue, important issue, whether it is corruption, it is violence against women, sexual exploitation of women, any kind of issue just does not become, however important it might be, does not become something which reverberates and causes that kind of discussion, debate, which can shake the government. And in fact, I think it's a very big loss because governments improve like that.
Yes? Reactions have come in to the electoral bonds scam, the investigation, the investigative work and all of that. In fact, the biggest reaction, of course, has been the Prime Minister's. In an interview to ANI, he seemed to suggest that look at the success of the electoral bonds. Here we are, and we know who donated to who very clearly, and that is the success of the electoral bonds. And if we don't have it, which we don't now because the Supreme Court has said it's unconstitutional, what will happen is black money will come flooding back into the system. He also said that while there, what has happened, who has been, which company has donated to who, and all of that can be debated and can be looked at. The fact is that we know all this because of the electoral bonds. What is your reaction? Because it seems a little bit like it's not the truth, isn't it?
Well, it's very unfortunate to hear the Prime Minister make such statements, because the Prime Minister essentially said that the electoral bond scheme was meant to reduce black money and cash in the system, in the political party funding system. And he said that this increased transparency in a political party funding. And he said that all those who are opposing electoral bonds will regret it. Now, this clearly shows that, the Prime Minister is trying to say that the Constitution bench of the Supreme Court has not interpreted the Constitution correctly. Because let us remember that this is the electoral bond scheme has not been struck down by anything less than a Supreme Court judgment, and a judgment of the Constitution bench of the Supreme Court, no less. And in fact, there was a very detailed hearing. And if anyone heard the hearing, it was very clear how the Supreme Court went into every detail. And after listening to every argument threadbare, the Supreme Court delivered this decision. So for the Prime Minister to make these statements, it appears that either he has no idea of the hearing, the way it happened, and the judgment he has not acquainted himself with, or that he is trying to question the wisdom of the Supreme Court. So I think that these statements are not just unfortunate, they also appear to show that there is a very desperate attempt to set a narrative, which is to say that, continue to defend a scheme which has been shown to be unconstitutional by the Supreme Court and ruled to be unconstitutional. And after the data has come out, it is showing that all the fears that the Supreme Court has listed, that people were listing about the electoral bonds, were indeed true. So I think that it's very unfortunate what the Prime Minister has said. For example, the Prime Minister is saying that black money would have been reduced by electoral bonds. Now, let's understand that when the electoral bond scheme was brought in, before the scheme was brought in, the RBI and the ECI wrote very detailed letters to the finance ministry saying, please don't bring this scheme because this will increase black money and money laundering in our country. And when the Supreme Court heard the arguments, they also went deep into this issue of black money generation and money laundering, and ruled very clearly that the electoral bonds would in fact increase black money and money laundering potentially in the country. So now for the Prime Minister to say that, black money and money laundering would be reduced, it doesn't make any sense. And if you look at the data is showing how 33 companies which were hugely loss-making, they had losses of 1 lakh crore rupees, made huge donations through electoral bonds to political parties. So the question is, were they doing money laundering? Were they acting as a front for somebody else? Because you see, electoral bonds could be traded. So if a company had money in the bank, they could go and buy the electoral bond and then sell it to another company or person who had cash and take cash from them. So this was really laundering money, it could potentially be. And that is what is now visible in the data that has come out. And cash, of course, carried on. The Supreme Court, when the Government Council tried to say this in the Supreme Court, that don't strike down electoral bonds because they are reducing cash in political parties, the Supreme Court asked the simple question. They said that when you introduced electoral bonds, did you also ban the taking of cash by political parties? And the Government Council had to say no. So that meant that even earlier cash was being given, and along with electoral bonds also cash was being given. In fact, before the 2019 elections, well after the electoral bond scheme had come, there was recovery of maximum amount of cash that there ever has been with political parties, illegal cash stashed away. So, there is no evidence of cash going down in the system.
As a result of the electoral bond scheme.
As a result of the electoral bond. So everything that the Prime Minister and the other ministers are saying is not borne out by evidence. And it's very unfortunate that such statements are being made. We would have liked the Prime Minister to come out. I mean, whether he was giving the interview to ANI or anyone else, and say that, okay, we, if it was a genuine attempt on their part, to say that, look, we tried, but it appears that it was not the best of schemes. The Supreme Court has struck it down, and the data is now showing that there was potentially a lot of corruption that happened through the scheme. We will make sure that we submit ourselves, and all political parties are submitted to proper accountability. That's what we expected the Prime Minister to say.
So there was a quote attributed to the Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman saying that if they come back to power, they will relaunch the electoral bonds after consultations. How do you react to that?
I mean, again, the question to ask Ms. Nirmala Sitharaman is that, is she trying to say that once they come to power for a third time, they're going to amend the constitution and do away with Article 19(1)(a), which is free speech and expression? Because the Supreme Court of India has clearly held, the Constitution bench has clearly held, that this scheme is violative of Article 19(1)(a) of the Constitution. So if they want to bring back this scheme, then either they will have to amend the Constitution, or they'll say that we want to do something unconstitutional again. So the basic structure of the electoral bond scheme was to introduce anonymity. The electoral bonds essentially opened the floodgates of anonymous political party funding. Unlimited anonymous political party funding. So when they say that we'll bring some amendments and we will introduce, we'll bring some necessary changes and we'll introduce the bonds again, I mean, the basic, feature of the bond is anonymity. So, I really don't understand what she's saying.
What happens next? I know that you filed again in the Supreme Court a petition to, asking for a special investigative team, isn't it, to look into to getting accountability on this electoral bond scheme. So one part of it is what the Supreme Court verdict has done in February, which has said these are unconstitutional and illegal. Then there is all this data that has come to us and all the investigative work piecing together the quid pro quo and the money trail and how it may have benefited the donors. And the third part of it is accountability for these actions that have occurred. And y'all have filed another petition. Tell us a little bit about that.
What we are seeing from the data is that there seem to be electoral bonds given to ruling parties at the center and in the states to get favors from these ruling parties. So, for example, Megha company, which donated 140 crore rupees through electoral bonds to the BJP, and in return, the BJP appears within a few days to have given a contract. The Maharashtra government, BJP government, gave a contract of 14,000 crore rupees to Megha. So, this proximity of giving of electoral bonds and receiving a contract by Megha shows that there could potentially be for a quid pro quo, for getting favors, and this money was really, in fact, kickbacks or bribes in the form of a bribe that was being given. Again, there are many pharma companies, pharmaceutical companies like Zydus, that the Bihar regulator said their drugs are substandard quality. and that action should be taken against them. The regulator was in Gujarat because the factories of Zydus were largely in Gujarat. Zydus gave electoral bonds to the BJP, and the BJP government in Gujarat was there. And the regulator in Gujarat did not take any action, and the medicines kept getting sold, these substandard medicines potentially. So what again this is showing is that this might be money bribes that were given for regulatory inaction, and which really impacts everybody's lives, because it's our children, it's all of us who are then taking these substandard medicines. So what this data is showing is how political parties put our lives at risk, put our lives at stake, and to be able to collect money from these companies. The Silkyara project, the tunnel, which all of us saw how it collapsed, and then rat miners had to be brought in to rescue after weeks the miners that was the people who were stuck in
construction.
the tunnel. That construction company, Navyug, has given electoral bonds to the ruling BJP. Similarly, the TMC, the DMK, others have also got money through electoral bonds. The Congress has got money. So it's very important that wherever there is a quid pro quo that is established, wherever it is clear that agencies are being misused for extortion. For example, in the IFB Agro company case, they have given 40 crore rupees to the TMC, and they have recorded in their governing body statement that they're giving it to settle the excise cases against them, and they're giving the electoral bonds of 40 crore rupees as per the instructions of the government. Now, all of this shows that there was potentially extortion happening. There are many companies that were being raided by the ED, CBI, IT department, all of which are controlled by the BJP government at the center. And the BJP was given money by these companies in very close proximity of them
to
getting
the actions of the investigative agencies.
So there are all these trends that are emerging from the data, trends of extortion, trends of corruption, bribery, and which is what is leading people to say that this is perhaps the largest ever scam in India, because what is happening is that money is being given through electoral bonds, although the bonds were only of 16,500 crores. But in return for these bonds, project worth lakhs of crores of rupees have been given. So the scam is not 16,500 crores. The scam is lakhs of crores of rupees. So it's in effect showing that there potentially is the largest scam that this country has seen. So we filed the Common Cause and CPIL, which is the Center for Public Interest Litigation, have filed a public interest litigation petition in the Supreme Court asking for an independent court-monitored SIT into the electoral bond scam. Because you see, our premier investigating agencies like the ED, CBI are appearing to be embroiled in this scam themselves, because of the kind of things that the data is throwing up. So we cannot expect them to do an independent, fair probe.
The Supreme Court verdict came in February 2024, but the petition that you all had filed, Common Cause and ADR, was actually, I think, in 2018?
Yes, 2017 and 2018.
So this, and the data of the electoral bonds that is now in the public domain is only from 2019 onwards. So there is still bits we don't know. In terms of, you said 16,500 crore rupees, but there is an amount which we don't know about because that is not yet in the public domain, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court took a very, very long time to deliver this judgment. it's taken the court about 6 years to deliver this very, very important judgment. In the meantime, we've had the 2019 general elections. We've had state elections across the country. And what the data is now showing is how the level playing field in a democracy was destroyed through these electoral bonds, because the BJP clearly has got a lion's share of the funding from electoral bonds. The way they were structured gave an undue advantage to the BJP. Because it was the ruling party at the center. But the judgment has come late. However, it's a very, very seminal, very important judgment. We celebrate the judgment, but it has come late. And yes, retrospectively, the data that the Supreme Court asked the SBI to provide was from its interim order of 12th November 2019. So the court said that all the data about who bought the electoral bonds and gave it to whom, which political party, from April 12, 2019 should be put in the public domain, which means that the data about electoral bonds, which was, all the bonds that were transacted from 2018 onwards, till 2019, is still not available in the public domain. That is about 25% of the electoral bonds, the value of those bonds, which is basically, about 4,000 crore rupees. So out of 16,500 crore rupees for which electoral bonds data, electoral bonds were bought, the value of those bonds, we have data for about 12,000 crore rupees. We don't have data for the over 4,000 crore rupees bonds that were bought and sold.
The kind of work that you've done over the years, a lot of the victories have come via the courts, and in this particular case also. So when you notice or when you hear, like we did, Justice Dipankar Dutta recently in the EVM and VVPAT case, talk about certain civil society groups trying to undermine the achievements of the nation, in that context, he said that in that context, but there is a sense, and there were, letters written recently by lawyers as well as retired judges talking about certain groups and certain lawyers and certain civil society groups that seem to be undermining the progress of the nation or the path that the nation is on. This could directly affect some of the work that you do, this kind of outlook. And if this is the outlook that is the prevailing outlook within the judiciary. Any comments on this, Anjali?
Well, all I can say is that it's very, very unfortunate, because you see all these organizations, I'm not saying that every single public interest litigation that is filed is carefully filed or researched, etc. But all these petitions, which have had this far-ranging, positive, progressive impact on our democracy, have been filed by institutions. And, it's very important that they be taken seriously if democracy has to have a chance in our country of flourishing. And, if there is a public interest litigation that is filed, which is showing something, that it's not well researched or not well meaning, of course, in that particular case, the Supreme Court can sort of dismiss it. But look at the electoral bonds case, look at the other cases, in this particular instance, the ADR, the Association for Democratic Reforms, was in question. If we look at so many cases that ADR has taken to courts, and where the courts have given progressive directions, where so many cases where other organizations, Common Cause, CPIL and others have taken to courts, where the courts have given very progressive directions, it has really taken democracy forward. So when such statements are made, we can still understand when they are being made by the political executive, because that is something that we have, come to
You're
be used
questioning the
to.
power of the political executive.
No,
So
we are
and why
saying
they
that.
react that way.
Yes, exactly. So when the political executive reacts like that, which I think a lot of people who are questioning the political executive's decisions, if they are not in public interest, who are dissenting against regressive policies or laws that have been made, when there is a crackdown on them and such statements are made by the political executive, that is one thing. But when judges start making such statements, that is indeed very concerning and very, very unfortunate, because then what is it meant to do? Is it meant to dissuade these groups, these associations or citizens who are at great odds which are stacked against them, still trying to work in public interest? So certainly these kind of statements are very, very concerning and disheartening. And
will they slow down this approach or this attitude of the judiciary if it is amplified, and if it continues? Will it slow down civil society efforts to seek recourse in the judiciary for the dilution of rights and for greater accountability and transparency?
Well, I don't know if it will slow these type of things down, because associations, groups, citizens who are concerned will continue to raise things and at different fora, including the judiciary, because that is our right in a democracy. But certainly these sort of things cause a chilling effect, and certainly these kind of statements discourage people. It might not result in reduction of people taking such issues to the courts or in different fora, but they also show the mindset, unfortunately, of these institutions, and which is why the institution of the Supreme Court and the judges in the courts need to be very careful when they make such statements, because in a democracy they are the ultimate pillar in a sense, and their entire existence is meant to protect and ensure that people are able to get their fundamental rights. So if there is a violation of fundamental rights, which is really what is taken up through PILs, then the courts, when they're making any statements, must be very careful and mindful that people don't feel dissuaded from approaching them if there is a violation of people's fundamental rights.
But Anjali, more power to you and the work that you do. Thank you for making time and explaining this very critical issue that in the electoral bonds case. And wish you good luck. We'll keep talking.
Thank you.